A beloved lion killed in Zimbabwe by an American hunter, a massive internet backlash, and a renewed debate over trophy hunting. In our health segment, is a one-dose malaria cure possible? And hitting the streets Harlem style. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Linor Moudou. This is Africa 54. Vincent Makori is off today. July 30th marks the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. Every year, thousands of men, women, and children fall into the hands of traffickers in their own countries and abroad. Almost every country in the world is affected by trafficking, whether as a country of origin, transit, or destination for victims. The United Nations say at any given time, an estimated 21 million people are trapped in modern-day slavery. Men, women, and children fall into the hands of traffickers, both in their own countries and abroad. Every country in the world is affected by human trafficking, whether as a country of origin, transit, or destination for victims. In 2010, the General Assembly adopted the Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons, urging governments worldwide to take coordinated and consistent measures to defeat this scourge. And the United States is promising not to give up its fight against what Secretary of State John Kerry calls the scourge of modern slavery. Officials released the country's annual human trafficking report recently, but it's being met with some criticism. VOA's national security correspondent Jeff Selden has more from the State Department.
At a State Department ceremony, Secretary of State John Kerry was blunt in his assessment.
The battle against money. It's a battle against evil.
The department's 2015 report says human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry that ensnares some of the world's more than 230 million migrant workers.
But it's a fight we absolutely have to win. It is a modern-day human rights challenge of enormous proportions.
The report lists 23 countries as Tier 3, failing to meet minimum standards to fight human trafficking, including Iran, Syria, Russia, and North Korea. But there are questions about whether the report, in some cases, was too lenient. Siddharth Kara with the Harvard Kennedy School via Skype.
It's a little curious that after 12 years on Tier 3, Cuba is upgraded shortly after the opening of diplomatic relations, and Malaysia, which was on Tier 3 last year, upgraded one notch higher around the same time that the president's pursuing a fairly ambitious trans-Pacific trade program.
And even some of those honored by the State Department wonder why the U.S. and its allies haven't been more forthcoming with help, like in the case of Yazidi women and children suffering at the hands of the group known as the Islamic State, or Daesh.
Every time we raise this issue with the international community, they say the first objective is to defeat Daesh, and this will take a very long time.
Activists warn the longer victims of human trafficking suffer, the deeper the physical and emotional scars will be, making healing all the more difficult. Secretary of State John Kerry says the report should be read as a call to action. But he and others say while the progress has been inspiring, the fight against human trafficking is one that will last for some time to come. Jeff Selden, VOA News, the State Department.
Joining us in the studio for more on the subject is Deborah Sigmund, founder and director of Innocence at Risk, a nonprofit organization established to help support the trafficking of women and children. Also joining us in the studio is Terry Fitzpatrick, journalist and document filmmaker and director of communication for the anti-trafficking organization Free the Slaves. Welcome both to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with you, Ms. Sigmund. What do you make of the report that was just released? What is your take on it?
Well, I really commend Secretary Kerry and agree with what he said. It is a call to action. And one of the eloquent statements that Secretary Kerry made is that this report from the United States is not a criticism from the United States to other countries. Rather than it is to show examples and really best practices in those countries of what certain country A is doing, so country B might follow. And we have seen this at Innocence at Risk. Innocence at Risk was established 10 years ago, and we've been working with embassies.
And we'll definitely get further with what your organization is doing. And let me have you, Terry, comment on this report in the global sense. It says that Africa is one of the world's global hotspots for modern slavery. What is that? Why is it the case?
Well, because the nature of slavery has changed. So the TIP report, which is actually kind of like an encyclopedia. It's used as a desk reference throughout the world for best practices, for good ideas, for inspiration, and for credit where credit is due. But today, slavery is concentrated largely in South Central Asia, if you look at the numbers, and in Africa. So the State Department's TIP report has Tier 1, the best, Tier 2 watch list, and Tier 3. Half or so of Africa's countries, 22 countries in Africa, are either in Tier 3, the worst offenders, or Tier 2 watch list. So it's clear that vulnerability, health care problems, economic insecurity, conflict makes trafficking worse. And that's why we're seeing such a concentration of modern-day trafficking and slavery in Africa.
And trafficking is also a problem here in the United States. And I read that about 300,000 children are forced into child prostitution and child pornography each year. Can you tell us about that, Deborah, given that that's the focus of your organization?
Well, our organization works on all aspects of trafficking for prevention. What Innocence at Risk is dedicated to doing is preventing trafficking from happening to this innocent life for a woman or a child. But yes, vulnerable children are certainly at risk. Runaway children from certain homes. There was a situation that a service provider called me and said, "Oh my heavens, you have to help us. There are 2 children down here, and they're only 12 and 13. And there was a raid on New York Avenue, and we need help. They have nothing, nothing, nothing. They're wrapped in a sheet." And there were 2 girls that their mother had remarried, and they had to run away because of that stepfather was abusing them. And so when they did, of course, this pimp trafficker is waiting for them at the bus station, saying he will take them to his aunt's house.
Wow, that's an incredible story, an incredible story. And there are so many stories like that. But let me ask you, Terry, what is the difference between trafficking and slavery as it is defined in this context?
Well, and that's the nature of slavery today, changing from what it was, where people from Africa were kidnapped and shipped around the world to Europe or to the Middle East or to the colonies. The slave trade, like that, except there is trafficking, transnational trafficking, the legal slave trade has been outlawed. It's illegal everywhere. Various conventions stop that. So slavery you can think of as what happens to you after you have been trafficked.
Okay.
So trafficking, now legally and under UN conventions, there are very specific rules about this, but as a general purpose, think of trafficking as moving a person from one place to another to enslave them once they get there.
Okay. And Deborah, when you talk about your organization, some of the steps that you've taken, an initiative with flight attendant, airline crews, tell us about that very briefly.
A flight attendant came to us in 2008 because we were having an awareness event. She said, we see what you're talking about. We don't know what to do about it. We produced this brochure giving flight attendants the trafficking national hotline number. With one flight attendant, we had 1,000. And a year later, I took this to Homeland Security, and they have backed us up.
So basically, you're teaching them how to recognize signs
They recognize situations and how to report it, the protocol to report it. And it is saving thousands of lives each year.
So Terry, who is being enslaved, really? Where do they find the victims?
Well, this is how you can crush slavery from 3 different directions. One is make sure that the perpetrators are prosecuted. Right now, it is a low-risk, high-profit crime, particularly in sex trafficking. 2, you need to reduce the demand by companies that are using slaves in their product supply chains to make products that are sold in every shopping mall in America or Europe around the world. And 3rd is cut off the supply of vulnerable people into slave jobs. People are enslaved for a reason. And if you look at those reasons at a community level, you help them become resistant to slavery. And once you help them get out of slavery, they're not likely to fall back into slavery. So squeeze it from 3 different directions and understand those vulnerabilities. And that's what slavery is really all about today.
Okay. That's all the time we have today. Terry and Deborah, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
And that was Deborah Sigmund and Terry Fitzpatrick. We thank them both for being here. Deborah Sigmund is founder and director of Innocent at Risk, and Terry Fitzpatrick is director of communication for the anti-trafficking organization Free the Slaves. Now, Nigeria has appointed Major General Iliya Abba to lead a new multinational task force created to fight Boko Haram Islamists in the face of increasingly bloody attacks. Abba commanded military operations in the oil-rich Niger Delta and will head the 5-nation force. The joint task force, made up of 8,700 troops from Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and Benin, is expected to be more effective than the current alliance. The militants have claimed some 15,000 lives in 6 years. And the death of Zimbabwe's beloved lion, known as Sechol, has angered people around the world and cast a spotlight on sport hunting in Africa. In Sechol's case, the tourist was an American dentist who paid $55,000 for the trophy. Experts say these lion hunts are often illegal and escape the attention of Africa's park rangers, already overwhelmed by poachers going after elephants and rhinos. VOA's Caroline Turner has more.
The iconic Cecil the lion was a popular tourist attraction among the tens of thousands of people who visit Zimbabwe's Wanga National Park each year. The 13-year-old lion had a distinctive black mane, a calm demeanor, and was featured in many photographic shoots. Cecil was also under surveillance by wildlife experts at Oxford University.
Cecil was collared. You may want to know what that means. Collared is an animal which is under surveillance, under a GPS system which is being used for research for different things.
The Zimbabwe Conservation Task Force say Cecil was lured outside of the protected park at night with the bait of a dead animal. They claim the hunter wounded the lion with an arrow, then tracked the lion for 40 hours, finally killing him with a gun.
The proper market value for this lion, which is a big treasure, would be around $100,000 US. Information so far received shows that there was money which was exchanged to the tune of around $55,000 US.
The hunter has been identified as Walter Palmer, a dentist from Minnesota who hunts big game and posts the photos on various websites. The news sparked worldwide outrage on social media. The blistering attacks forced the hunter to shut down his Twitter, Facebook, and website, and protesters swamped his dental practice in Minneapolis. An online petition demanding that Dr. Palmer face justice for killing Cecil has drawn some 100,000 signatures. Meantime, in Zimbabwe, professional hunter Theo Bronkhorst and local landowner Anis Delovo could face up to 15 years in prison for assisting Palmer. And the Zimbabwe Conservation Force says Cecil's death leaves his pride in danger. With Cecil dead, the next lion in the hierarchy will most likely kill all Cecil's cubs so that he can insert his own bloodline into the females. Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
Walt Palmer was said to be in hiding, issued a written statement saying that he believes he acted legally and relied on the expertise of local professional guides to ensure a legal hunt. The Zimbabwe hunter and landowner go to trial August 5th. And Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has threatened to expel Western diplomats for allegedly sponsoring vendors to defy an order to vacate Harare's central business district. Mr. Mugabe pointed fingers at the U.S. and Britain, saying they were behind the vendors' refusal to move out of the city center. Vendors clashed with municipal police Wednesday while the leaders were arrested for obstructing what the police say is a cleanup operation. The 91-year-old president made his threats to the ambassadors as he officially opened the Small to Medium Enterprises International Expo in Harare. Now to Malawi, where the death toll from illegal abortion is on the rise and raising concerns within the government. The Malawi Law Commission says it is considering liberalizing stringent abortion laws to save lives. Government statistics indicate that 70,000 women have mostly illegal abortions each year, and 17% of them die in the procedure. Malawi spends $1 million a year treating post-abortion complications. Abortion is currently illegal in the country and carries a maximum jail sentence of 14 years. The new law will allow abortion in pregnancies resulting from rape, defilement, and incest. Anti-corruption activists say billions of dollars of so-called dirty money from the proceeds of crime, especially from Russia, are being laundered through the London property market. As Henry Ridgewell reports from the British capital, the government has pledged to crack down on the practice.
Over the past 5 years, prime London property has risen in value by 42%. Activists say it is partly fueled by dirty money from the proceeds of crime, which is being laundered through the purchase of property. In a recent television programme titled From Russia with Cash, anti-corruption activist Roman Borisovich posed as a Russian government minister looking to buy property with stolen money and visited several real estate agents in central London. Speaking to VOA via Skype, he described what happened.
They were all eager to proceed. Even if when I was telling them that the money was meant for procurement of drugs, and I stole the money, and obviously some sick people were deprived of health care, and they could not care less.
All the agents suggested buying the properties through offshore companies to offer anonymity to the buyer. One proposed exploiting tax havens in Cyprus and the British dependency of Jersey to set up a so-called shell company.
This particular agent was volunteering to put us in front of Jersey financiers to put the trust together, and a secret lawyer to put everything else together.
Government figures show $191 billion worth of property in Britain is owned by offshore companies. Speaking on a trip to Singapore Tuesday, Prime Minister David Cameron said most were legitimate businesses, but acknowledged there were problems.
I'm determined that the UK must not become a safe haven for corrupt money from around the world. We need to stop corrupt officials or organised criminals using anonymous shell companies to invest their ill-gotten gains in London property without being tracked down.
Analysts say the government has been aware of the laundering allegations for years.
And this is dirty money, coming from crime, maybe coming from terrorism. So this needs to be dealt with now.
Under British law, real estate agents are to report any suspicions that the cash used to buy property has been obtained through criminal means. But many agents say they should not be expected to detect sophisticated fraud. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
After weeks of speculation, the president of the Union of European Football Association, Michel Platini, has announced he will run to succeed outgoing FIFA president Sepp Blatter. Platini says he wants to give FIFA the dignity and the position it deserves. He has been UEFA president since 2007 and a FIFA executive committee member since 2002. In 1984, Platini played 3 World Cups for France and led them to the European Championship title in 1984. Blatter was re-elected for a 5th term as president on May 29th, but 4 days later said he would resign amid the worst crisis in FIFA's history. Blatter will remain as president until the election on February 26, 2016. Blatter beat Prince Ali bin Al Hussein of Jordan, who is now seen as the most likely candidate to challenge Platini. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the story we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, scientists in South Africa reach an important threshold in the fight against malaria. Stay with us.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
Smoking cigarettes is a well-known health hazard and mortality risk. Disease such as Ebola can also radically shorten lifespan. But researchers at the University of Cambridge have released a new study about the impact of having multiple chronic conditions. They find that having more than one of the so-called cardiometabolic conditions, stroke, heart attack, or type 2 diabetes, does not bode well for long life. Their startling conclusion, having 2 of these conditions by age 60, reduced life expectancy by some 12 years in men and 13 years for women. This was a shorter life expectancy than even that of lifelong smokers. The researchers say their findings highlight the importance of heart disease and stroke prevention for diabetes patients. Health professionals say that healthy lifestyle habits can improve heart and overall health. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
The World Health Organization says Africa risks a massive meningitis outbreak. The WHO says in just the first 6 months of 2015, 12,000 cases of meningitis C have been reported in Niger and Nigeria, with 800 deaths. Meningococcal meningitis is a bacterial form of meningitis, a serious infection of the thin lining that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. The disease can cause severe brain damage and is fatal in 50% of cases if untreated. Dr. William Perea is WHO's coordinator for control of epidemic diseases.
This serogroup is re-emerging in Africa. Our best weapon to control this disease and meningitis in Africa is vaccination. And we have 2-pronged strategies. One is preventive vaccination, to give the vaccination to a cohort of people to have a long-term protection of the population. Unfortunately, we don't have the right vaccine available for that.
That was Dr. Olivier Renvaux with WHO. Now the International Coordinating Group for Vaccine Provision for Epidemic Meningitis Control are calling on vaccine manufacturers to step up meningitis C-containing vaccine production by 5 million doses before the 2016 meningitis season starts in January. Scientists have long been trying to develop an effective protection and cure for malaria, one of the deadliest diseases that affects people in tropical areas, especially children, as the World Health Organization announces plans to begin clinical trials of a promising new vaccine. Scientists in South Africa report that they too are at an important threshold. VOA's George Pudick reports they are testing a compound that could be a single-dose cure for malaria.
It looks like the race to find a cure for the disease that infects about 200 million people annually is close to the finish line, as several research groups report successful initial clinical tests. In 2013, some 600,000 patients died of malaria, most of them children in sub-Saharan Africa. Working in cooperation with scientists in Switzerland and Australia through the non-profit Medicines for Malaria venture, researchers at the University of Cape Town report their new drug, MMVO48, is very promising.
We've done extensive safety testing as a requirement, and thirdly, we've looked into the process of manufacturing the drug on a large scale.
Kelly Chibale says in the first phase of human clinical trials, the drug instantly killed even the drug-resistant strains of malaria parasites.
Of course, there is a long way to go. The potential that this compound offers is more than just the potential to impact malaria control, but also the potential to impact eradication, because it's able to block transmission.
The number of malaria-related deaths has been reduced by 47% over the last 15 years, mainly through use of bed nets, spraying against mosquitoes, and therapies based on existing drugs. George Pudick, VOA News, Washington.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. One of New York's most famous neighborhoods becomes a hot tourist destination. We'll be right back.
du moment où c'est pas intégral. On peut porter le foulard, on peut... De toute façon, le port en fait, c'est pas obligatoire, c'est pas religieux, c'est culturel.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here is what is trending. One of fashion's most famous muses takes the internet by storm. Jane Birkin has asked Hermes to take her name off its famous Birkin crocodile bag. The company named the bag after Birkin about 30 years ago, and it remains one of its best sellers. The iconic Birkin bags are beloved by celebrities and can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Birkin was upset when she saw a video about what the animal rights group asserted were abuses on a crocodile farm that supplies Hermes with skins. Hermes says the company is investigating the Texas farm which was implicated in the video. Next up, it's one of America's most famous neighborhoods. Now, visiting Harlem has become a trend for tourists hoping to learn about its layers of African-American history. Its museums, shops, restaurants, and more are selecting Harlem among top tour sites in New York City landmarks like Times Square, Central Park, One World Trade Center, and the Statue of Liberty. In addition to the cultural history, Harlem's many hip new restaurants are giving New Yorkers around the city a reason to join out-of-towners heading uptown for a meal. Harlem is the second most requested neighborhood in Manhattan after Midtown at Big Apple Greeter, an organization that connects tourists with local volunteers for free neighborhood visits. And finally, a beloved children's author is back in stores 24 years after his death. Harper Lee's Go Set a Watchman isn't the only book out this summer that reveals an earlier look at beloved characters. What Pet Should I Get? By Dr. Seuss features the same siblings seen in the 1960 classic One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. Seuss, whose real name was Theodore Guy Seal, wrote and illustrated more than 40 children's books during his lifetime. What Pet Should I Get is already a hit, debuting at #1 on Amazon. And that's what's trending today, Lenore.
Thanks, Esther. And that's our show for today. Goodbye.
Welcome to English in a Minute, where we teach you all about idioms in American English. If you've ever heard someone say that they were dressed to kill, don't worry, you're not in any danger. It's just the opposite.
Do you see that couple over there? Yeah, it looks like they're going into that new restaurant. They look great. Oh yeah, they are dressed to kill.
In American English, dressed to kill is a different way of saying dressed very attractively or dressed to impress. This phrase came from criminals. In the past, people who were professional criminals often dressed in fancy clothing to hide the fact that they were doing horrible things. So, if you were dressed to kill back then, you would be wearing a pretty nice looking outfit. And that's English in a Minute.